Hey, my name's Eli Grayson. I'm 24, and just a few months ago, I found myself driving back into Willow Creek, that sleepy little town in the Midwest where I grew up. It's in Nebraska, tucked away between endless fields of corn and the occasional dusty road that leads nowhere in particular. The kind of place where time feels like it's on a permanent coffee break. Mornings start with the rumble of yellow school buses picking up kids, afternoons are filled with the chatter of housewives on front porches, and evenings smell like backyard barbecues wafting through the air. I hadn't been back in 6 years, not since I left for college in Chicago, chasing some vague dream of a bigger life. 4 years of lectures, late night studying economics, and trying to fit in with city kids who talked about internships at fancy firms. Then 2 more years bouncing between office jobs that felt like they were sucking the soul right out of me, sitting in cubicles, staring at spreadsheets, wondering if this was all there was. Eventually, I packed up my old truck, quit the last gig without much fanfare, and headed home. Not because I had a grand plan, but because I needed to remember who I was before the world got its hands on me. My parents' house is at the end of Laurel Street, a quiet lane lined with old maples that turn fiery red in the fall. The porch is still covered in that same green moss it always had, the backyard overgrown with weeds I used to pull as a kid for pocket money, and the white picket fence runs straight through to the neighbors' yards like it did when I was small. Mom and Dad haven't changed much either. Dad still tinkers in the garage with his old radio playing classic rock, and Mom brews coffee every morning like clockwork, strong and black, just how she likes it. They welcomed me back with open arms, no questions asked about why I was home or what I planned to do next. "Take your time, son," Dad said, clapping me on the shoulder. Mom just hugged me tight and said she'd make my favorite apple pie. It felt good, being in that safe space again, but it also stirred up a whirlwind of memories I hadn't let myself think about in years. Right next door, separated by that same white fence, lives Harper Dawson. She's the same age as me, and we've known each other since we were in diapers. Our moms were best friends back then, swapping recipes and watching us play in the yard. I remember the first time I really noticed her, me climbing the big oak tree behind our houses, scraping my knee on the way down, and Harper running over with a Band-Aid she'd swiped from her mom's first aid kit. "Don't cry, Eli," she'd said, her little voice all serious. "Heroes don't cry." From then on, we were inseparable. Summers were our kingdom. We'd build forts out of old blankets and branches in the backyard, have epic water gun fights that left us soaked and laughing, and chase fireflies at dusk until our parents called us in. We'd lie on the grass, staring up at the stars, talking about everything from aliens to what we'd be when we grew up. I wanted to be an astronaut. Harper dreamed of being a writer, spinning stories about far-off places we'd escape to one day. Winters were just as magical. We'd bundle up in scarves and mittens, build snowmen that always ended up lopsided, and then huddle inside with hot cocoa, watching Disney movies on her family's old VHS player. We'd argue over whether Simba or Aladdin was cooler, me rooting for the Lion King, her for the street smart thief, and munch on popcorn while plotting our next adventure. Harper was always the one with the wild ideas, like turning the attic into a secret clubhouse or sneaking out at midnight to count shooting stars. She had this infectious laugh, the kind that made everything feel lighter, and those bright eyes that sparkled like she knew some secret about the world. The memory that sticks with me the most, though, is from one June afternoon when we were 10. It was hot, the kind of sticky heat that makes your shirt cling to your back, and we'd spent the day at the town fair. I won a cheap plastic ring from one of those claw machines, the kind with a fake diamond that caught the light just right. Harper was wearing her favorite yellow sundress, holding her cat Mun in her arms, her hair in pigtails. I remember my hands shaking as I held out the ring, my voice cracking a little. "When we grow up, I'm gonna marry you, Harper. Promise you won't marry anyone else?" She stared at me with wide eyes, then burst out laughing, but not in a mean way. She took the ring, slipped it onto her pinky finger since it was too big for the others, and nodded solemnly. "Okay, Eli, but if you break it, you owe me ice cream for the whole school." We even made a pact, scribbling it on a piece of notebook paper with crayons, hearts doodled in the margins, and stuffed it into an old shoebox we hid in her attic. The secret promise box, we called it. As we got older, things shifted naturally. We went to different classes in middle school, made new friends. I got into basketball, spending afternoons on the court with the guys while Harper became the town library's volunteer whiz, stacking books and recommending reads to anyone who'd listen. She was always the smart one, the girl with her nose in a novel under the old maple tree out front. But even as life pulled us in different directions, we'd still wave from our windows or chat over the fence. I'd see her light on late at night and wonder what she was reading, or she'd cheer the loudest at my games. That promise from when we were kids faded into the background. Just a funny story we'd laugh about now and then. Pulling up to the house that August day, I didn't expect much to have changed, but as I unloaded my bags, I heard a familiar voice from next door. "Eli, is that really you?" There she was, leaning over the fence, her hair tied back in a ponytail, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, but with that same bright smile. She looked the same, yet different, more grown up, with a quiet confidence in her eyes. "Finally decided to come home, huh? Don't tell me you're leaving again soon." I laughed, feeling a warmth spread through me that I hadn't felt in years. "Nah, Harper, this time I'm staying put." We chatted for a bit, catching up on the basics, her still working at the library, me figuring out my next move. But as she waved goodbye and headed inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that coming home meant more than just seeing my parents. It meant rediscovering Harper. And maybe, just maybe, that old promise wasn't as childish as I'd thought. Lying in my old bed that night, staring at the ceiling cracks I knew by heart, I wondered if promises like that ever really expired. The next morning, I woke up to the familiar smell of Mom's coffee drifting up the stairs. Sunlight filtered through the faded curtains of my old room, casting long shadows on the posters I'd left behind, basketball heroes and faded band logos from high school. I stretched, feeling the creak of the bed frame, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel that nagging pull to check my phone for emails or messages from a boss I barely knew. Instead, I threw on some running shorts and sneakers, figuring a jog around the neighborhood might clear my head. Willow Creek streets were quiet at that hour, just the occasional dog walker or early riser sipping coffee on their porch. I hadn't gone far when I spotted her, Harper, lacing up her shoes on her front steps, her ponytail swinging as she stood up. "Eli, perfect timing!" she called out, waving me over with that effortless grin. "Join me? I was just heading out for my loop around the lake." I nodded, falling into step beside her without a second thought. It felt natural, like slipping back into an old routine. We ran side by side, our breaths syncing up as we wound through the tree-lined paths, the air crisp with the scent of dew on grass. Harper chatted easily about the town gossip, who'd gotten married, who'd opened a new cafe downtown, and how the library was finally getting a computer upgrade. She asked about Chicago, and I opened up a bit about the grind, the long hours and stuffy offices, the feeling of being just another face in the crowd. "It sounds exciting, but exhausting," she said, glancing at me with those understanding eyes. "You always were the one who wanted to see the world. What brought you back?" I shrugged, admitting I didn't really know, just that I needed a reset. After the run, we grabbed coffee at the corner diner, the same spot we'd haunted as teens. Harper ordered her usual cappuccino with extra foam, and I stuck with iced latte, even though the morning was cool. We sat at a booth by the window, watching cars roll by, and it hit me how easy it was to talk to her. No awkward pauses, no need to impress. She laughed at my stories about city mishaps, like the time I got lost on the subway and ended up in the wrong borough. And she shared bits about her life. Still at the library, helping with the summer reading program, and baking pies for the farmer's market on weekends. "Mom's recipe," she said with a wink, "keeps me busy." There was something comforting in the familiarity, like the town itself had wrapped us in its quiet rhythm. That afternoon, I headed out to the backyard to tackle the overgrown weeds. Dad's arthritis had made it hard for him to keep up. I was knee-deep in dirt when Harper poked her head over the fence. "Need a hand? Looks like a jungle back there." Before I could protest, she hopped over, gloves in hand, and we spent the next hour pulling roots and trimming hedges. It turned into one of those lazy, laughter-filled sessions, dirt smudged on our faces, teasing each other about who was doing more work. At one point, she paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "Remember the forts we built out here? We'd pretend it was a castle." I chuckled, nodding. "Yeah, and you'd always make me be the dragon." She grinned, but her eyes softened. Good times. Feels like yesterday. As the sun dipped lower, we took a break on the porch swing, sipping lemonade Mom had brought out. That's when Harper mentioned the old shoebox. You know, I still have it. The secret promise box, up in the attic. My heart skipped a beat, but I played it cool. Really? Let's see if it's still there. We climbed up to her attic, dusty and crammed with boxes of holiday decorations and forgotten toys. She rummaged around and pulled it out, a faded cardboard box with our crayon scribbles on the lid. Inside were the treasures, dried flowers from our adventures, a couple of marbles I'd won at recess, and there at the bottom the crumpled notebook paper with our pact. Harper unfolded it carefully, reading aloud in a mock, serious voice. Eli promises to marry Harper when we're big. No takebacks. We both laughed, but then she grew quiet, tracing the hearts we'd drawn. She pulled something else from her pocket. The plastic ring, its fake gem scratched and dull from years. I kept this too, she said softly, holding it out. That day, it was the first time I really believed someone would stick around. Her voice caught, and I saw a flicker of something deeper in her eyes, a vulnerability she rarely showed. I took the ring, turning it over in my hands, feeling the weight of those childhood words. I didn't think you'd remember it like that, I admitted, my throat tight. It was just a silly kid thing. She shook her head, her smile bittersweet. Not to me, Eli. Back then, it meant everything. We sat there in the dim attic light, the air thick with dust and memories, and for a moment the years between us melted away. As we climbed down, Harper tucked the ring back into her pocket and we headed outside. The evening air was cooling, fireflies starting to blink in the yard. She walked me to the fence, lingering a second longer than usual. Thanks for today, she said. It's good having you back. I nodded, watching her disappear into her house. Back in my room, I replayed the moment with the ring, her words echoing. Someone would stick around. I realized then that Harper wasn't just my old friend anymore. There was a depth to her I hadn't fully seen before, layers of quiet strength and hidden hurts. And for the first time, I wanted to peel them back, to understand what had shaped her in the years I'd been gone. Holding onto the echo of that promise, I wondered if coming home wasn't just about finding myself, but about rediscovering her too. The days after digging up that old promise box blurred into a rhythm that felt both new and achingly familiar. I'd wake up early, help Dad with odd jobs around the house, fixing a squeaky door or painting the shed, and then find myself wandering over to Harper's side of the fence. It started innocently enough. She'd call me over to help move a heavy planter in her garden, or I'd spot her struggling with a ladder while cleaning the gutters. But each time, I'd linger longer than necessary, our conversations stretching from small talk about the weather to deeper dives into what we'd been up to in the years apart. I noticed things about her I hadn't before, the way her laugh lines crinkled when she teased me, or how she'd tuck a stray hair behind her ear when she got thoughtful. And every now and then, our hands would brush accidentally while passing a tool, sending a spark through me that I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just friendship anymore. It was something warmer, something that made my pulse quicken when I heard her voice calling my name from next door. One weekend, we decided to tackle the old bike path behind our houses, the one we'd raced on as kids. The trail was overgrown now, weeds choking the gravel, but Harper suggested we clear it for old times' sake. We spent the afternoon hacking away at the brush, sweat dripping down our backs under the Nebraska sun. At one point, I lost my footing on a loose rock, and she caught my arm to steady me. Her touch lingered a second too long, her fingers warm against my skin. "Careful there, Eli," she said with a soft smile, her eyes meeting mine in a way that made the air feel thicker. I mumbled a thanks, but inside my mind was racing. Pushing the bikes back home as the sun set, our shoulders bumping occasionally, I felt that pull again, like the world had narrowed to just the two of us on that quiet street. I started paying closer attention to her routines, too. Harper was always the strong one, the girl who'd bandage my scrapes without flinching. But now, I saw the cracks. The way her shoulders slumped after long days at the library, or how she'd stare off into the distance during our talks, her mind somewhere else. I knew her mom had passed away when we were teens, cancer, quick and cruel, and her dad had been in the nursing home for years now, his Alzheimer's stealing him away bit by bit. She visited him every other day, but she rarely talked about it. "He's having a good week," she'd say with a forced brightness, changing the subject to something lighter, like the new books at work. But I could see the toll it took, the quiet exhaustion in her eyes. It all came to a head one crisp afternoon. I'd finished up a shift at the local hardware store, picking up part-time work to keep busy, and decided to swing by the Willow Creek nursing home on a whim. I told myself it was to drop off some magazines for the residents, but deep down I knew I was checking on her. Sure enough, there she was, sitting alone on a bench in the garden, her head in her hands. She didn't see me at first, her shoulders shaking slightly, and my heart twisted at the sight. Harper, who always held it together, was breaking. I didn't approach right away. Instead, I scribbled a quick note on a scrap of paper from my pocket. "If you need a ride home or just someone to sit with, I'm here." I folded it and slipped it into her hand as I walked by, pretending it was casual. She looked up startled, her eyes red-rimmed but grateful. "Eli," she started, but I just nodded and kept walking, giving her space. That evening, my phone buzzed with a simple text. "Thanks." I figured that was it, but around midnight, as a light rain began to patter against my window, there was a soft knock at the back door. It was her, standing on the porch in a hoodie, her hair damp from the drizzle. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside and we ended up in the kitchen, where I poured us both some tea. She sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the mug like it was a lifeline. "Dad didn't know me today," she said finally, her words tumbling out. "He called me by Mom's name, then got confused and asked where she was. It's like pieces of him are just vanishing." Tears welled up, and she wiped them away quickly, but I could see the dam breaking. She opened up then, more than she ever had. About the years after I left, how she'd stayed in Willow Creek to care for her dad, turning down a scholarship to a bigger school because she couldn't bear to leave him alone. About the guy she'd dated seriously a few years back, someone from the next town over, who talked about marriage and a future together. "I thought he was the one," she said, her voice cracking. "But when Dad got worse and I said I couldn't move away, he left. Said he didn't sign up for small-town life forever." She looked down at her tea, stirring it absently. "Growing up means realizing people leave, Eli. You learn to let go, to carry on alone. That's just how it is." I reached across the table then, my hand covering hers. It was warm, steady, and for the first time she didn't pull away. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," I said quietly. "I'm not making any new promises, Harper, but if you need me, I'll stay." Her fingers trembled under mine and she squeezed back, a silent acknowledgement. In that moment, sitting there in the dim kitchen light with the rain drumming outside, I knew this wasn't about our childhood pact anymore. It was about seeing her now, the woman she'd become, strong yet fragile, and wanting to be the one who stood by her side. She leaned her head on my shoulder eventually, and we stayed like that until the storm eased. As she headed home later, slipping out the back door with a quiet, "Good night," I watched her silhouette fade into the night. Standing on the porch, the golden light from her window spilling out through the rain, I felt a resolve settle in me. I didn't know if I could keep this unspoken promise, if life would pull us apart again. But for the first time, I wanted to try. The weeks that followed felt like we were rediscovering each other in slow motion, layer by layer, without any grand declarations or awkward confessions. It just happened naturally, like the way the leaves turned in Willow Creek's fall. Subtle at first, then undeniable. I'd find excuses to help around her place, fixing the leaky faucet in her kitchen that she'd mentioned offhand, or repainting the front door that had faded from years of sun. Harper would show up at my folks' house with a plate of fresh-baked cookies or a thermos of coffee, claiming she'd made too much. "Can't let it go to waste," she'd say with a wink, handing it over the fence. We'd end up sitting on the porch, talking until the stars came out, our conversations weaving between the mundane and the meaningful. She'd tease me about my city habits, like how I still checked my phone too often, and I'd rib her about her endless stack of library books cluttering her living room. But it wasn't all smooth. We had our rough patches, the kind that come with getting close to someone after so long apart. One day, I came home late from a job site, covered in sawdust and too tired to talk much. Harper had stopped by with dinner, but when I brushed off her questions about my day, she got quiet, her face tightening. You don't have to share everything, Eli, but don't shut me out like I'm just the neighbor, she said, her voice edged with frustration. She left before I could respond, the screen door slamming a little harder than usual. I felt like an idiot pacing the kitchen, realizing I'd taken her patience for granted. The next morning, I showed up at her door with a bouquet of wildflowers I'd picked from the field behind the lake. No words, just handed them over. She took them, her eyes softening, and we spent the afternoon raking leaves in silence until she finally laughed and tossed a handful at me. Truce? I asked. Truce, she agreed, and just like that, we moved on. Those little conflicts taught me something. Loving her meant showing up, even when it was messy. Harper's strength was one of the things that drew me in deeper, but so was her vulnerability, the part she tried to hide. Her dad's condition weighed on her more than she let on. I'd see her coming back from the nursing home, her steps slower, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. He's okay, she'd say if I asked, but I knew better. One evening, after a particularly tough visit, she showed up at my back door unannounced. He thought I was mom again today, she whispered, leaning against the frame like she might collapse. I didn't say much, just pulled her inside, sat her down, and made her a cup of tea. We didn't talk about it right away. Instead, I let her lean against me on the couch, her head on my shoulder, as the quiet wrapped around us. Eventually, the words came, how she felt guilty for not being able to do more, how the disease was stealing the last pieces of him. Some days I wonder if I'm strong enough for this, she admitted, her voice breaking. I held her hand, tracing circles on her palm. You are, I said softly, and on the days you're not, I've got you. She didn't cry then, but she stayed, curling closer, and in that moment, I knew I was falling hard. The turning point came on a stormy night in late September, the kind where the wind howls through the trees and rain lashes the windows like it's trying to break in. I'd just settled in with a book when there was a knock. Insistent, urgent. I opened the door to find Harper standing there, drenched, holding a covered dish that smelled like cheese and tomatoes. Lasagna, she said, her teeth chattering. I made it earlier. Didn't want to be alone. I pulled her inside, grabbing a towel from the hall closet and wrapping it around her shoulders. We ended up in the kitchen, the storm raging outside as I heated up plates. She picked at her food at first, then looked up at me, her eyes searching. Eli, do you remember that promise? The one from when we were kids? I nodded, my fork pausing midair. The one about marrying me, she continued, her voice barely audible over the thunder. I'm not asking you to keep it, but if I get weak, if things get too hard, would you stay? The question hung there, heavy and real. I set down my fork, reaching across the table to take her hand. Harper, I said, my voice steady. I'm not that kid anymore. But yeah, I'll stay. Not because of some old promise, but because I choose you, every day. Her eyes filled with tears then, spilling over as she squeezed my hand back. I've been so scared, she whispered. Scared of losing Dad, scared of being alone forever, but with you, it feels different. She stood up, coming around the table, and I pulled her into my arms. She buried her face in my shoulder, her body shaking with sobs she'd held in for too long. I held her tight, stroking her back, the rain pounding like a drumbeat around us. For the first time, she let herself fall apart completely, and I was there to catch her. No words needed, just the quiet assurance of being together. As the storm eased, her tears slowed, and she pulled back slightly, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Thank you, she murmured. I wiped a stray tear from her cheek, my thumb lingering. In that instant, with the kitchen light casting a warm glow and the world outside still rumbling, I leaned in and kissed her, soft, tentative at first, then deeper as she kissed me back. It wasn't rushed or passionate, it was a promise in itself, a silent vow that I was here, choosing her. We didn't say much after that. She fell asleep on my shoulder eventually, her breathing even and calm. Watching her there, peaceful for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized this was what love looked like grown up. Not fireworks or grand gestures, but showing up in the storm. I didn't promise eternity that night, but as I held her close, I knew this was where I belonged. The months after that stormy night unfolded like the quiet turning of seasons in Willow Creek, gradual, steady, and full of small wonders that added up to something profound. Harper and I didn't rush into labels or announcements. We just started living it day by day. I picked up steady work as a carpenter at the local mill, framing houses and building decks for folks around town. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt honest, like I was finally putting down roots in the place I'd always called home. Harper kept her job at the library, organizing story hours for the kids and recommending books to anyone who wandered in. She'd come home with stacks of novels, and we'd spend evenings reading side by side on the couch, her feet tucked under a blanket, me stealing glances at her over the pages. We adopted a scruffy little mutt from the shelter a few weeks in, named him Lucky because that's how we both felt. He was a bundle of energy, chasing squirrels in the backyard and curling up at our feet during dinner. Mornings became our ritual. Coffee on the porch as Lucky bounded around, Harper in a robe, me in yesterday's t-shirt, talking about nothing and everything. Weekends, we'd pack a picnic and drive out to the lake, hiking trails we'd known as kids but now saw with fresh eyes. She'd lean her head on my shoulder as we watched the water ripple, and I'd feel this deep contentment settle in, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking together. But life wasn't all easy afternoons. Harper's dad continued to fade, his good days becoming rarer. There were visits where he'd stare blankly, not recognizing her at all, or worse, confuse her with her mom and ask why she hadn't come home yet. Those afternoons left her drained, her eyes shadowed when she'd return. I'd meet her at the nursing home sometimes, sitting quietly beside her on the bench, holding her hand as she fought back tears. One particularly hard day, he called me by her ex's name, mumbling something about taking care of my girl. Harper laughed it off in the moment, but back home she broke down in the kitchen, clutching the counter. "What if he forgets me completely?" she whispered. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder. "He won't forget the love you gave him, and I'm here for all of it." She turned in my embrace, burying her face in my chest, and we stood like that until her breathing steadied. I learned to be her anchor on those days, not with big words, but with simple presence. A warm meal waiting, a walk with Lucky to clear her head, or just silence when she needed it. Our first winter together sealed it all. Snow blanketed Willow Creek in a hush, turning the streets into a postcard scene. I moved most of my things over to her place gradually. No big ceremony, just boxes stacked in the hall, until one day it felt like home. That Christmas Eve, as flurries danced outside, we sat by the fire she'd insisted on building. Lucky snored at our feet, the tree twinkling with lights we'd strung up together. Harper reached into a drawer, pulling out the old plastic ring, its edges worn smooth from years in her pocket. "I don't need you to keep that kid promise anymore," she said, her voice soft. "I don't need grand vows or forever, just knowing you'll be here when I wake up tomorrow. That's enough." I smiled, feeling my throat tighten. From my coat pocket, I pulled out the silver band I'd bought on a whim during a supply run to Omaha. Simple, etched with a faint pattern like the veins of a maple leaf. "I'm not promising eternity, Harper," I said, sliding it onto her finger next to where the plastic one had once sat. "But I'll choose you every day, through the good and the hard." Her eyes shimmered as she looked at it, then at me. And she leaned in, kissing me with a tenderness that said more than words ever could. We didn't talk about marriage or rings that night. We just held each other, the fire crackling, the world outside frozen and still. Now, as I sit on the porch with her, watching the snow fall in lazy drifts, her hand in mine and Lucky at our feet, I realize Willow Creek was never just a place to find myself again. It was where I found her, really found her, and where we built something new from the ashes of what we'd lost. Meals under the golden kitchen light, walks hand in hand, quiet nights where her presence chases away the shadows. We don't say forever, because life taught us both that's not always ours to promise. But in the warmth of her touch, the glow from our window spilling out into the night, I know this. We've turned two lonely houses into one home. And for us, that's more than enough.